Welcome to the On the Air podcast, a companion to On the Air magazine, a bi-monthly magazine from ARL for beginner to intermediate ham radio licensees. I'm your host and the editor of On the Air, Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY. Every month, the On the Air podcast extends material found in On the Air magazine to help you learn about the many things the ham radio hobby and service has to offer. The On the Air podcast is sponsored by ICOM for the love of ham radio. Welcome to the February 2024 episode. The January-February 2024 issue of On the Air featured a story from Brian McSpadden Gardener, KE8JVX, about the first-year experiences of a general class ham, where Brian details how he got his feet wet as a general and how he put together his first station for HF. Brian's joined us today to tell us a little more about his first year as a general, as well as what he's done since then. Welcome, Brian.
Well, thank you, Becky, for having me on today. This is very exciting.
Well, thank you for being here. So you've been a general since April 2022?
Yes, that's correct.
So in your article, you mention that you had been a technician for 5 years and somebody gave you a spectrum analyzer, and that's what really got you interested in HF. That's a really different sort of story from what I usually hear about what inspired people to upgrade. A lot of times it's very focused in operating. You know, I heard all the fun stuff that was going on HF, and I wanted to be able to have access to that. So this, it seems like you're coming at it a little differently. What was it about the spectrum analyzer that sparked your interest in upgrading?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, when I got my technician's license in 2018, we were at a solar minimum, and technicians can really only get on to 10 meters, and there wasn't much activity there. I'd gone to the Hamvention that year where I got licensed and kind of saw for the first time all the different things that ham radio operators do. And I only had a certain amount of time to get involved, so I worked a little bit with the repeaters and I set up my home VHF station. But between life and work and just a little difficulty in wrapping my head around all of that, there wasn't a lot of activity for me. But the second thing is that in my job, I go through the Midwest and I see all these antennas on people's houses and outside their barns. And I think it was just as the part of my normal work, seeing all of the variety that kind of pushed me back and saying, there's got to be lots of different types of radio propagation. And so I went online and I found out more about not only VHF and UHF, which I was licensed to work in, but also HF and medium frequencies and frequencies that were higher, and started to understand more of what was there. And when I got that spectrum analyzer, I got to see actually which signals were bouncing around wherever I was. And it was really cool to see how in different parts of the Midwest where I was traveling, I would see different types of signals pop up. And I saw a lot pop up on the weekends around HF. And of course, I think what really appeals to me now that I've been in it for a year and a half or so is making contacts at long distances, particularly doing DX. And I think that spectral analyzer gave me my first vision of that and that possibility.
Wow. So you came at it from a visual angle instead of what I hear from a lot of folks about, you know, I was tuning around and, you know, or I heard a friend with a general or an extra tuning around, and it's a different way to come at it. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think too that some of it, you know, all of our minds work a little bit differently. And I'm a conceptual guy, and so the idea that there are people who take, you know, the equivalent of a 100-watt flashlight and shine it up at the ionosphere and it bounces off once, twice, or skims around and you can talk to people half the world away. That's just really a neat concept.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your article that you studied for the general for 3 months. How'd you go about that? Did you self-study? Were you in a class? How'd you do that?
I probably didn't do it the most efficient way. I started with the licensee handbook, and of
Hmm.
course, those are great. I'm a pretty much a book learner. I like to read a lot, but I also got one of the apps that gives you a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing when I went through my schooling, when I took that physics portion that dealt with electromagnetism, that was
Hmm.
probably my lowest science grade in all of
Oh,
my schooling. So for whatever reason, my brain isn't quite wired that way. And there's a significant part of the general that you have to learn some very basic stuff.
mhm.
And I think for some people it's pretty easy. For me, it was just a little bit more difficult. So I would read a chapter a week. I would take questions, practice those questions. By the time that I was 4 chapters further, the first chapter questions had kind of fallen out of my brain. So it took me a while to get to the point where I was really comfortable with the material. But, it's a hobby. So it wasn't like I was spending, 4 hours a day studying like I was in school. This was just kind of
Mhm.
a part-time weekend activity. But by the time spring rolled around, I felt confident enough that I could pass. And then I looked to see where VE examiners in Central Ohio were giving exams that I could take and upgrade.
Mhm. So that's great that, you did it yourself. There's no one path, to studying for a license. And as you said, people's minds are different. People respond to different types of learning. So, and as you mentioned, it's a hobby. So it took you 3 months chipping away at it here and there. I imagine you had to brush up on things that fell out of your brain. How did you keep yourself motivated and on track over those 3 months? That's a good
Yeah.
chunk of time.
Yeah, well, it was long on the calendar, but like I said, I was only probably putting an hour or two a week into it.
Mhm.
And that's just because that's where I am in life. Ironically, it wasn't until after I got my general license exam that I started exploring the ARL website a little bit more thoroughly and
Mhm.
found all their great educational materials. And at that point, I kind of kicked myself. I should have just taken the video practice. That would have
Yeah,
been a lot easier.
yeah.
But that's part of what's fun about the hobby is that there's so many channels now, whether it be YouTube or websites or at the library. And, it's sometimes hard to find those sources that really resonate with you as a learner. And in my case, I went about it the old fashioned way and then discovered that, this new fashioned way with recordings and videos, that's really
Yeah.
actually really easy.
Yeah,
And I
it's
think
out
I do
there.
more
Yeah.
of that now than I did when I was first studying for the general.
Mm. Yeah, so, now if you maybe wanna upgrade to extra, you know that those videos are there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned that soon after you upgraded to general, you attended meetings of not one, but two clubs that were local to you. It's really fortunate that you had multiple local clubs. Um, can you tell us the names of the
Sure,
clubs?
sure. So one is actually, so I live in Central Ohio near the capital city of Columbus. And so, I'm blessed by being in a large metropolitan area. And there are actually a couple of additional clubs. The two that I was involved with, first was the one that had given me my general license and also gave me my first experience on the air on HF at Field Day in 2022.
Mhm.
And that's the CRES Amateur Radio Club. And they're still quite active. And I worked with them for a little bit doing, now I'm forgetting. Now you're going to have to edit this part out. Uh, I worked with the CRS ARC on their repeater when they had online meetings through Echolink.
Mm.
Part
Mhm.
of the challenge with them is that they're on the far side of Columbus, and so it's like a 45-minute drive. And so it's just, again, a little bit harder to stay involved with them. But I did get some good resources and some mentoring when I was
Mhm.
working with them. The other one was the Central Ohio Radio Club. Again, kind of like with any social club, there's different personalities involved, and they were very welcoming. Unfortunately, the time frames that they normally meet don't work well with my work schedule. But again, their websites gave me more access to more sources of information, and I was able to see some of the presentations that had been given at their clubs that they had posted their own slides for, and that helped me learn more and appreciate more about the hobby as well.
Great. So shout out to those clubs. It sounds like they were very helpful to you. That's wonderful. Were you involved in clubs as a technician?
No, I wasn't. And again, part of that was work related, and the other part was just being kind of slow to understand all the things that were available to people.
So, how did you end up becoming aware of those clubs?
Uh, I think it was around the time that I was studying for my general and thinking about, okay, who ends up putting on the license exams, and recognizing that, yeah, it's generally volunteers in the local amateur radio clubs. And those are the people who also get involved with all of the service, the ARIES and the marathons and bike races that provide extra support there. Most of that's done on VHF, which again, like I said, I wasn't as interested in, but I think it's really great that those people are there and willing to teach newbies what they know, because again, there's so many different places where people can end up in the hobby. And I've just found that the people in those clubs, as well as the community as a whole, are very welcoming to new people.
So, do you have any advice for new hams who might feel a little, fearful about walking into a ham club meeting without knowing anybody? Do you have any um, pep talk kind of stuff for them?
Well, I think the biggest thing is in ham radio, it's really about getting on the air, right? And I think that if you don't know when and how to approach a club beyond getting your license, the best time is really around field day, because that has much more of a picnic atmosphere. People are set up often to be welcoming at that point. And so it's a lot easier to kind of see what the setup of antennas is all about, what operating really looks like. You know, for me as an individual, that first year, and particularly the first 6 months, it was reading how you're supposed to communicate on the air and what the order of information is. But until you actually do it, it doesn't slip off the tongue very easily. But seeing someone do that at field day made me a lot more comfortable. So I'd really recommend people, try going out for their local field day. Find out where their local clubs are being set up. They typically have that information on their websites, and that's very easy to Google up. In terms of going to the clubs themselves, it's like any other social situation. You show up, but you got to say hi and introduce yourself. And when you do that, you'll find that most people are willing to say hello to you and ask you, hey, what brought you to the club today? And I think that they'll find that, again, the ham radio community generally is quite welcoming in that regard.
So you mentioned, sometimes it's hard to, in the wealth of resources that's out there, it's hard to find the thing that you really needed until maybe after you've already found what you were looking for. Did you know about ARL's club locator? We've got a club locator. We've got a field day site locator.
Yeah,
Do you know about those?
yes, I do. And actually, I think that's actually how I found the field day
Oh,
locations.
good.
Was actually through that site. Again, I know it's only been a year and a half, but it seems like several years, because I've done so much activity. Almost every other week, I'm on the air doing either contests or just trying to do some experiments with my antennas and learn a little bit more about propagation from my home location.
Wonderful. I wanted to talk a little bit about your HF station. You spend quite a bit of time in the article talking about how you approached that very methodically. Um, so what did you start with as a technician? Did you have anything as a tech that you were able to build upon?
Yeah, so as a tech, of course, I started with a handheld transceiver,
Mhm.
and I also really got started with a 50-watt mobile station and a battery power lithium phosphate battery, and then just what would be a mobile antenna.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I set up my station initially. And like I said, I could hit several repeaters within a 30-mile radius of my home with that, and made some contacts that way.
Mhm.
I started with the ICOM 7100, which also has D-Star.
Mhm.
And that's how I first learned about, again, these internet-based links that you hit a repeater and then the repeater's connected to the internet and transfers your signal to another repeater at some distance away, and made some contacts that way as well, but not quite as many as I'd hoped. Part of it, well, actually, most of it was me not quite understanding propagation very well and not really having a good orientation, and quite honestly, not very much height on my antenna,
Oh.
which is a problem in my location. But so that was kind of my VHF experience.
Mhm. So for HF, you mentioned that you figured out what your goals were for the station, as
Mhm.
well as your budget,
Right.
and then followed up with a bunch of research where you tried to find equipment that was aligned to those goals.
Right.
Um, can you talk a little bit about the research that you did? Where did you find good information? Did you learn anything that was surprising to you,
Mhm.
as you looked for stuff that was a good match for your goals?
Sure. So, obviously, having gone to the Hamvention and becoming aware of the different retailers out there, I would go to their websites and see again all of the different types of equipment, and it's like, all right, so anything from a few $100s to several $1,000s, and I was definitely not at the high end of that. But I wanted new as opposed to used.
Mhm.
But I found that the resource eHamNet was really useful. They have a lot of hams who've worked with different types of equipment, talking about both the pros and the cons of different equipment. So that kind of really allowed for some comparison there. And of course, when I was going to the club meetings, I'd sometimes ask people what their setup was. And we all have our preferences. And, there's some people that prefer one brand over another. But really, since the 1990s, I think the quality of all of the equipment that's out there is so much better than it had been in the
Mhm.
decades before, that for people who are getting started, it's hard to go wrong. The difference will end up being in maybe a factor of 2 or 3 of sensitivity, but all of it will allow you to kind of get on the air. And like I said, make contacts. For me, the exciting thing was making DX contacts, and I've mapped those out now over the past year, and we can talk about that in a little bit if you like. Um, and I think you can do that with a lot of the different types of equipment that's out there. But the base, what you need a good antenna with a minimal setup. I started with a buddy stick antenna, made some contacts on 20 meters, found that I was getting a little bit of feedback with it because I wasn't tuning it very well, because I was trying to tune it with a radio that didn't have an internal tuner. So I got an external tuner, I got an
Mhm.
SWR meter, and those things really helped me improve my efficiency with it. But it was a compromise antenna. It's great as a portable. It's very light, very easy to set up. But then I got into wire antennas and learned about, the importance of height and directionality with those. And so it just kind of led from one thing to another. But again, trying to stay within a budget, because ultimately there's always more fun things that you could be doing than you have money to
Yeah.
do, right?
Yeah. So your article covers your first year as a general, which takes us up to about April 2023.
Right.
And here we are in the early part of 2024. So, what has been happening? What have you been doing in the hobby since spring 2023?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing was, my first year was to try to make, over 100 contacts, and I easily was able to do that. But then I wanted to make over 500 contacts in the next period. And with all of the contesting that I've been doing, I actually for 2023 made over 1,000 contacts. 500 plus of those had been confirmed by a logbook on the world. And that resource is also something that I've come to use and appreciate. For Christmas, I got two of the new books to keep up
Hey,
my learning. Again,
yep,
I'm a scientist by training, though a biologist, and so it's kind of fun to play around with antennas and see where things go. And one of the great resources that was in there was talking about these azimuthal maps, and I plotted out where I had made contacts in the past year on the different grids, so that I
yeah,
can then again set those personal goals,
hmm,
which make it fun. And I
yeah,
think for me, a lot of it is just making contact with people. And in the contest, it's about numbers and locations and points. But in those off times, it's about talking with people and, talking to people who want to chat, who are in a different country. It's the cheapest form of travel you can get.
yeah,
And it's a great way to connect.
yeah. So, what advice do you have for technician class hams who are thinking about upgrading, maybe wondering, you know, uh, can I handle the test material? Can I study adequately? Is it going to cost me a fortune to set up my new station? Any thoughts? What you might say?
So first thing is you're actually lucky as a technician right now. We're about hitting the social maximum. So there's actually quite a lot of activity on 10 meters, and there will be for the next couple of years.
Yep.
So if you're on a really tight budget, you can just get transmitters that are focused on 10 meters. And for just a couple of $100s, I can guarantee you could get a setup that will get you thousands of miles worth of contacts, and maybe you'll hit one of those lucky weather events like I did in the past year, where I hit Australia once and it was confirmed. And to do that on 100 watts, that's kind of amazing. The second thing is that as you do go up to the next level, take a look at the different options. There are some really good entry-level HF radios that are about $1,000. You can find used versions of those or their predecessors for a few $100s, 400 or 500. You can get a really good rig that will serve you for 5 or 10 years easily. And I really enjoy the portable setup. It costs about $100 for a solid battery that you can easily recharge at home, but it'll give you a half day, if not a full day, of operating out in the field. A simple SWR meter, I think, is really important. It allows you to get your antenna tuned so that your efficiency is really as high as it can be. And that's really important if you're operating at less than 100 watts.
Yeah.
And then for those who, are interested in pushing the limits, you can go in so many directions. But I'd say for the first year, keep it simple. Get a basic HF rig that gets you on the bands from 80 meters to 10 meters, an antenna setup that'll do that, and you'll just have many, many hours of fun operating ahead of you.
Fantastic. And that's what it's all about, having fun.
And for those who are wondering about, getting prepared and preparing to get that license, it is a lot easier. And I would strongly advise doing what I didn't do, which is to go online. The educational resources that the ARL has that are also available elsewhere on the internet, those video classes can make it really easy. Local radio clubs sometimes have classes as well, and if you like to learn with others, maybe that's the best thing for you. But really, there's just many different tools out there that don't really cost much of anything other than the time for you to learn. And you'll learn a lot of new things that will make the hobby more enjoyable.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Brian. Brian McSpadden Gardener, KE8JVX, been with us today to talk about what it's like to be a new general. And thanks again, Brian.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
You too. The On the Air podcast will be back in March 73.
73.